What folklore creature do you think really exists? Episode 1. There's a local legend in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which involves a mysterious and supposedly deadly sort of otherworldly creature. Some versions claim that it's a man-like shapeshifter, capable of blending in with the shadows as it stalks through the desert. Others describe the beast as being curiously canine in nature, albeit with 2 long limbs, black claws, and eyes that seem to burn like pinprick embers in the darkness. One thing that remains the same through every retelling, though, is the high and eerie keening noise it's said to make when it hunts down its prey. One evening when I was about 11 years old, I heard it. I had been lying in bed, reading beneath my covers with a flashlight, when a mournful howl pierced the air from somewhere across the moonlit sands. My first thought was that it had been a coyote, but as the sound echoed through the night for a second time, I felt a shiver of panic flash up my spine and a deep weight of dread coalesce in my chest. That evil wail was not the call of anything I had ever encountered, nor of something that should have even existed in the waking world. It was the cry of a nightmare incarnate, and no amount of reason or rationality could shake me off that notion. Now, at around the same time as this story, I'd been doing my best to foster a reputation for being independent and unflappable. That goal went swiftly out the window as the screeches seemed to draw ever closer, and I quickly ran from my room to seek the protection of my parents. Upon reaching their door, though, I was presented with an even more terrifying discovery. The howls were coming from inside the house, along with a lot of heavy breathing and the occasional whisper. I couldn't look my mother in the eye for a week. Shadow people. I had an experience when I was in high school that made me believe. I told this story before, but this was at my friend's apartment building, which his parents owned. It was a pretty old building in the Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago, and according to his dad it used to be owned by Al Capone, but I'm not sure how true that was. We had an apartment on the top floor that they let us use to just hang out, and it allowed us easy access to the roof where we could go smoke cigarettes. One night, we were about to go up, but I had to pee, so I told him I'd meet him up there. After I was done, I went up the stairs to the attic portion that was connected to the roof. There were no lights, so we always used our phones to guide us. We had those old flip phones without lights, so you only had the light from the screen to help navigate the cluttered mess that was up there. As I made my way to the roof door, I saw a shadow pass by me. Now this wasn't like the shadow of something moving with the light of my phone. This shadow felt solid like a person. I followed the direction it went, thinking it was my friend. I kept saying that I knew it was him and to stop playing around. It passed me a few more times, before heading to the other side of the attic, and that's when I heard my friend's voice from downstairs. He got a call from his girlfriend and was in another room talking to her the whole time. I have no idea what that shadow figure was, but it really freaked me out, and I told my friend what happened and that I did not want to go back up there. The Lusca. For one, people have disappeared in the blue holes on the Bahamas Islands for a long time. They are connected to the ocean by long and winding caves that sharks can't fit through. Only an octopus could. People are dragged down, with no bite marks, no blood in the water, and no remains to be found. And then, this happened. On January 18, 2011, the body of what appeared to witness to be a giant octopus washed ashore on Grand Bahama Island in the Bahamas. According to eyewitness reports, the remains seemed to represent only a portion of the head and mouth parts of the original creature. Based on their knowledge of octopus morphology, local fishers estimated the total size of the creature when living to be some 20 to 30 feet, 6 to 9 m. The biggest octopus in the world is supposedly the giant Pacific octopus with a max size of 14 feet. This one would be more than twice that. River Monsters also had an episode on this. People for hundreds of years have reported seeing enormous octopi. People have allegedly seen tentacles rise out of the sea, or the entire animal, grab someone and sink back into the sea. Some people don't even want to go near the blue holes. And if you watch that video of the octopus grabbing the crab from the water and dragging it in, you'd know other octopus species do this. Wendigo of the East US for sure. There's a secret camping spot about 1.5 miles into the woods by the river that my family uses on exceedingly rare occasions, and we've had 3 separate experiences in the last 20 years. After the first time I went there at 8 years old, my mom went to camp there by herself as she had done many times before. She's fearless, and in 99% of cases she'd throw hands with something spirity in nature if she needed to. This was the other 1%. While she was camping, she kept hearing persistent noises that didn't sound natural. She said that she kept seeing these white little apparitions in the trees around her, and they seemed increasingly frantic. She started hearing what sounded like logs being thrown into the river. Big, super heavy objects, getting closer and closer upstream to her. She packed up her things right there in the middle of the night and left. She said it was like she was being followed the whole way back to the car. Swears to this day she experienced a wendigo and that the trees were trying to warn her to get away. My sister's father went camping in the same spot trying to avoid the police. Ended up getting arrested somewhere in town anyway. In one of the first letters he sent to my sister, that I myself read, he told her to relay to my mom that he had a crazy unnatural experience there and that she was the only person who could understand what he went through when he was there. He claimed there was something big stalking around him during the night, making all kinds of noise, but wasn't a bear, or deer, or anything wild in nature. He said he was overcome with a feeling of dread and absolute panic. 3 years ago, I went camping with my boyfriend and a friend. I told them nothing about the spot before we went. I burned some sage when we got there and put a bunch in a creek that runs through the site as an offering. We had a normal night. However, the friend that was with us, an outdoorsy kind of man, said that he was woken up in the middle of the night by something walking through the campsite. The lantern was on all night, and he said to her something very tall and thin walking, but thought it was the lantern casting a weird shadow of one of us going to pee. Not one of us had gotten out of our tents all night, and we found that there were large bones littered all around the site. I'm talking like medium to large animal bones, not from a cat or raccoon. We had been there since about 12 the day before, so we knew they had not been there before. Our food cooler was still out, with some of our half-eaten chocolate on top of it. Untouched. Not a bear. It seemed to be like, I'll let this go this one time, but here's a warning, GTFO. North American Wendigos, man. I believe quite a few as a Native American. I'm 10% Osidi Sakoan on my dad's side and 30% Cherokee on my mom's side. One such beast that scares me as bad as the Wendigo or Skinwalker is the werewolf. I told this story to a few friends online. Most run away when I tell them about it. Others grab a bag of snacks and sit down to hear my tale. If you're happy about going into the woods, please don't read what I am about to tell you, because you will be overly cautious about the woods from this point forward. So my encounter with this creature is one of probably scariest moments I ever had in my life. Many years ago, as a teenager living out in the sticks, as we say in the southern US, I was out letting the dog use the bathroom when I heard crickets all around me chirping away into the night. Then they stopped. All of them in perfect unison. Then it got eerily quiet. Not even an owl hooted. Now, being in the country, you can't just stop the sounds of the forest. The forest is lively after dark. Then, somewhere deep inside me, I got a really bad feeling that there was something unnatural lurking near our cabin. My senses told me that whatever it was very tall, of pure evil, nearby the cabin. I glanced around to see where I thought it was, and I stopped and looked at a hill east of our house, and then the growls started. I wished to God I had been smarter and headed back inside the cabin. But the native in me wondered what this thing was. I grew up in the Rockies for a few years as a kid, but am a southern kid at heart. In the mile-high forests are wolves, mountain lions, grizzly bears, and even rumors of Sasquatch people are all things I knew. I have an ability called clairvoyance because of my ancestry, like a medicine man. It has saved my life a few times. Now back to the story. The growl I heard was like a wolf's growl when it is about to snarl at you, only this thing had a much deeper growl. It was as though it was demonic in origin. My blood ran ice cold, probably dropping to about 80 degrees. I listened and could hear it walking around, and it snapped 3-inch thick saplings like twigs. That meant this thing was around 500 pounds or more and probably quite tall if it is that weight, like Andre the Giant. The pauses in between steps confirmed my suspicions. When you are tall, it takes more effort to move your long legs when you walk or run. Then I listened closer to the walking rhythm and realized it walked on 2 legs like a human did. Surprised face. Then it stopped for a second or two. As if it were knew I was around but could sense that I wasn't like any other humans it observed before. I had an ability that wasn't like other humans. So, after pausing, it growled toward my direction as if to say, "You don't scare me, you Native American man. I laugh at your ability." Luckily for me, we had a few Bibles in the house we kept on hand. I could hear a pack of coyotes yipping as if they killed a deer. Then this thing growled at them, and the coyotes all shut up. My dog growled a bit. I told her to stay quiet. We ran back into the cabin, locked the doors, and drew the curtains. I reached for a Bible as fast as I could and held it tight to my chest the rest of the night as I slept. When morning came, I had the dumb idea to go up there where this beast was walking around and discover a deer that had deep claw marks on its bones and was stripped clean to the bone. The only thing left untouched was the head. All around me, those 3-inch thick trees were snapped in a path. I had never been up in these woods before, but it was like a horror movie that I was starring in. Not long after that, I discovered the creepiest trailer I could ever come across. It was sunk a bit into the ground but had parts of it ripped open by something very sharp. A few months later, I checked on the trailer again and it was on its side. Never went into the woods for 2 months after that. I did some research to find out what it was I had encountered as a child. My brain told me that it was a werewolf. Something the French fur trappers of the 1600s called loup-garou. In English, that means dogmen. From the encounters, one couple staying in their camper in a national park had one of them peek through their window and smile at them. Jinn. While I never known my lineage to be dabble or have association with such creature, I have been approached 3 times by such being. First is a manifestation of a white snake that told me that he had been in the service of my ancestor 1,000 years ago. It didn't ask for permission or request anything, just an understanding that it was just there. I guess it owes some blood oath to my ancestors somehow. The second time was a black malevolent spirit that followed me home after I walked home from a long stretch of road more than 20 kilometers long. He can't hurt me, I guess, and he just left after a while. Third time, it was outside of my country. She said she served on the court of Aryan kings, would like to just follow me. Her power, as she described it to me, is knowledge, and she gave me some information as proof of her power over very prominent people in my country that would have destroyed them if it were true. I don't care to make deal with eldritch creature and didn't care to check on the information if it true. It is much too dangerous to be messing with that. She looks childlike with blue skin patched with geometric pattern. I don't believe in ghosts and supernatural. I have no mental illness, no depression, no family history of schizophrenia or mental illness. 3 times they visited me, and the last one had information I should never have guessed. If those 3 never come to me, I would have laughed at the idea of jinn. If there is one thing that we experience in the Philippines, especially in provinces, we have a creature called a tik-tik. It's a creature that basically preys and eats fetuses or babies. They make this tick-tick noise. The louder they are, the farther they are from you. The quieter the sounds, the closer they are to lunging towards you. They mostly reside in areas with lots of trees. The reason I believe in this is because we have experienced the former while my mom and dad experienced the latter. A tick-tick preyed on my cousin a few days after he was born. It didn't make sense to us when he and his mom moved in with us when we were younger. My siblings with me as the youngest, around 6 to 7 at that time, stayed in their house for almost a month, thinking it was because our house was undergoing some minor renovations. When night falls, we would hear loud tick-tick noises and couldn't understand why it happened every night. Also, they started burning rubber in their yard, which was only unpleasant if we left our cousin's air-conditioned room. By the third week, it ceased to make noise. There was a blessing in that house by the fourth week. Mom only explained to us about this when we got older, when I asked her why my younger sister, who was about a month old when that incident happened, didn't join us at that time. It happened a few more times with other cousins and neighbors that had newborns in their household. Again, we had to stay in other people's houses for the meantime only to dissuade the tick-tick. A few of my neighbors' babies died because I remember attending a few of their funerals. My dad, who grew up in the mountains, mentioned that his younger sister died because of the tick-tick. My friends also had a handful of experiences when they went to stay with their families from rural or mountainous areas. I don't know if it sounds plausible, but me, my family, neighbors, and friends have witnessed them. There has been a decline in attacks. This did happen early 2000s. It may sound far-fetched, but this is the account of my story. NYC sewer alligators. In the early 20th century, small alligators as pets were apparently a popular thing among kids, and when they started to get too big, parents allegedly disposed of them by throwing them down the drains/into the sewers like dead goldfish. I can totally see them living off the massive sewer rats and growing to be a decent size, and a dark, dank, muddy environment like the NYC underground seems like a viable habitat for them. They were also the inspiration for Doc Connors from Spider-Man. I would not be terribly surprised for us to discover a North American ape or monkey living in the deep woods. But I will be shocked if it is more than 2 feet tall and 50 pounds. We humans are unbelievably bad at estimating size and distance. Ask any hunter about ground shrinkage, and that is on an animal they love and know passionately and spends years staring at. Someone catching a glance of something odd and remembering it huge is not even a little unusual. We do. My roommate once proclaimed, "Yo, there's a cat in your mailbox." Of course, all raced to the porch to see. Sure enough, there's a furry gray blob sitting on the mailbox. My other roommate just kept murmuring, "Kitty. Kitty." It's a kitty, but then its tail dropped and curled, quite unlike a cat, and its head turned towards us. You've never seen a bunch of Florida girls hauling ass faster before, I swear. We ended up calling wildlife control and they found it 2 houses down. It was not the first in our area, and sadly it wasn't the last. There's more now, specifically around the parks, and they are not nice. I guess all my compatriots are still asleep down in the southern hemisphere, so no one's posted it. But the min lights are definitely something real and more than just something you can blow off. Yowies are also probably out there, along with other things. Australia, same as Canada, is so big and so uninhabited that, at least to me, it's really not that hard to accept that there are things out there that we don't know about. I mean, for all we know, maybe these creatures are subterranean and are rarely on the surface. The two I think are most likely, the kraken. Giant squid has finally been conclusively proven to exist in the last decade or so. It's not unbelievable an even larger variety is out there or was still extant in the age of sailing. The other is Bigfoot/Sasquatch. While the most well-known sighting/recording has been proven a hoax, the stories of them go back hundreds of years in native tribes. The description is not that far off from the Gigantopithecus that once really did exist. While it seems unlikely a sustainable breeding population of those could have remained alive this long, it's not impossible. We've rediscovered other species thought extinct, and the Pacific Northwest is huge and there are a lot of very remote forests. I'm a lot more dubious of this one, but these are the 2 that seem the most plausible to me. U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt, a highly experienced outdoorsperson, documented in his journal about an encounter he had with what he believed to be one in Wyoming, and shared reports of natives and mountain men who encountered it and even one who was attacked. Pretty interesting considering if anyone was familiar with Western wildlife at the time, it was him. I think orang pindak probably existed until relatively recently, still probably may be extinct for thousands of years though. The stories make sense, they are widespread and common in the areas it was said to exist, and there is a fossil record for small hominids in other islands in Indonesia. My cousins used to live in northern Wisconsin, and they all swore that they would run into what looked like a wendigo in the Chequamegon. Said it was crawling vertically down a tree. Tall humanoid with gray skin. They didn't see its face, but they ran like hell once they realized it. My friends and I will be camping up there in August. I'm bringing guns. Lots of guns. Sure. Rhyme, Japanese, lit. Buttocks eye is a strange yokon with an eye in the place of his anus. The story goes as follows. Long ago, a samurai was walking at night down the road to Kyoto, when he heard someone calling out for him to wait. "Who's there?" he asked nervously, only to turn around and find a man stripping off his clothes and pointing his bare buttocks at the flabbergasted traveler. A huge glittering eye then opened up where the strange man's anus should have been. Early elephant drawings are also horribly inaccurate. Let's all remember how medieval cats are drawn, and we can rest assured that elephants could have 5 trunks, tusks out their ass and ears on their legs for all they knew. Edit, I see many don't know what horrors need to be unleashed, so I'll just make it easy for you all / medieval cats and you can thank me later. As a form of a traditional demon, the Baba Yaga, a witch Slavic folklore. Had an imaginary friend named Baba which that lived in my barn when I was little. One time I was playing with it and got locked in a room with no lock. I screamed for nearly 30 minutes before my mom got me out. Fast forward a few years, and I had gotten these things called creature cards which were like big cards with pictures and facts about animals and monsters. When I saw the Baba Yaga, it looked almost exactly how I'd imagined Baba Witch. Fast forward to now, it all kind of clicked for me. The oarfish inspired many sea serpent myths as well. Officially the longest was 36 feet but there have been reports of them growing to 56 feet. Lots of comments on how these are totally sea serpents. I think the difference is they aren't known to sink ships and drag sailors down. Or they're just so good at it we haven't been able to prove it yet. Happy sailing! According to legend, St. George the Dragon Slayer earned his moniker by traveling to Middle East, Libya, fighting, and killing a dragon. You might assume, and many did, that the story was made up. But they discovered art in the Middle East from the time period showing a knight in full British armor fighting a giant crocodile. So, I think it was all true and the dragon was real. The people of Britain just didn't know what a crocodile was. I shouldn't have said British armor, better to say, knight's armor. Middle East should be Africa, I'm an American. This is the first time I've heard someone claim that St. George was English. He's the patron saint of England, and Georgia, Ethiopia, Aragon, Beirut, Freiburg, and syphilis, but he was not himself English. He was a 3rd/4th century Greek-Roman soldier. If they discovered art in the Middle East of someone dressed like a medieval English knight, then that person was definitely not St. George. Considering the fact that we've recorded massive sea creatures moving faster and deeper than anything we know on sonar, along with the fact that we've explored, what is it, less than 2% of the ocean? We're also finding new sea creatures every single day. I realize that sounds far-fetched, but this is all at the top of my head, and from what I've heard from a number of sources. Whether they were all reliable or not, I honestly cannot recall. I think it's possible there's some big stuff down there. Oh, and as someone else mentioned, it is in the deep woods. Not many people have gone to where I'm talking about. Even those that go miles into the woods stay on well-preserved trails. So how do we know there isn't miles into nowhere? I am from East Africa, and we also have mythology about skinwalkers. The most famous story is about 2 lions called the Ghost and the Darkness. They were 2 adult male lions without manes. They killed many workers of a British colonial railway and took their bodies as trophies and stored the cadavers in their cave. This is very strange behavior for a lion or any other animal. Africans believe the ghost and the darkness were two witch doctors that turned into lions to fight the colonialists that were destroying the animal's habitat. Both lions were eventually killed. They are now in a museum in America, I think. Wendigo stems from cautionary tales about the taboo of cannibalism among the Algonquin peoples. The idea of a malevolent spirit that infects and changes a person that resorted to cannibalism is fairly apt, and it's easy to see how the warnings morphed into the Wendigo. That said, tales of skinwalkers and their kind I believe have more truth to them than I am comfortable with. I'm as for cryptozoology as the next guy, but I actually heard about a possible explanation for the chupacabra. It's a coyote or some type of canine with scabies, mange, so they lose all their hair and start acting odd. There also have been people who released inbred dogs for hunting purposes, see Texas Blue Dog, that were also called chupacabra. So those are possible answers for the chupacabra. Though, it doesn't fit the bipedal version's *Q dramatic music and lens flare. Fairies. The Northern European kind. I live and work in the woods. I end up in places where people simply don't go, helicopters in and out of all kinds of forests. There's something out here I don't understand, but it certainly seems to understand me. I wear a sock inside out every day 'cause of it, a trick my nan taught me. Always wear a piece of clothing inside out or the fairies will take you. I don't deal with fairies. Alright, so in Minnesota there's this cryptid/lumberjack folklore that exists called a tea kettle. To put it simply, it's a corgi with cat ears that walks backwards, by choice, and whistles like kettle. All it does is roam around forests and whistles, but it's super shy, so if you hear it you're lucky. It's so cute I need it to exist, so the tea kettle. Sasquatch. There's only circumstantial or anecdotal evidence, but it still seems legitimate to me. I don't believe they are interdimensional travelers or some of the sillier people describe encountering. Those are fun stories, though. It just seems very plausible that there is something humanoid out there keeping mostly to itself. My grandfather was a logger in Washington in his younger years. He never spoke in great detail, but he wouldn't deny they existed. My brothers and I, asked about Bigfoot and all he would say is that there's things out there that shouldn't be. We grew up on the East Coast so we didn't think we would ever encounter one, but he would always tell us to not go deep into the woods. Wendigos as well. I grew up close to Beltrami Forest in Minnesota, a place with rich Ojibwe history said by some to be the birthplace of the myth, debatable, and I could swear up and down there were moments where I felt some pretty intense energy coming from that forest. Me and some friends drove around the forest ghost hunting once and one of my other friends' eyes grew wide as she said, "We have to leave now," and started panicking. Yes, it's true, if you want to be spooked, you will be spooked. It was probably all in our heads. But I still can't help but feel like there's some weight to the legend. Shadow people happened to me too a few years ago. I was sleeping over my girlfriend's when I woke up in the middle of the night and her bedroom door was open. I sat up and saw what I thought was her dad in the doorway. It was pitch black in the room, but I could see his outline clear. It looked just like him. Then it started motioning for me to come over to him. But me being half asleep, I thought he wanted my girlfriend. So, I tried to wake her up. Like really tried, I was practically shoving her off the bed. She never did. I looked back and the shadowed person was still there, but that's when I realized something felt very wrong. Like I could just feel them staring at me, but it was a cold stare. I laid back down in bed and kind of hid behind her until I had gone to sleep. But then when I went to sleep she woke up and started waking me up. I told her what happened and that her dad was looking for her, but when I looked at the door it was closed. I couldn't explain it, it was the scariest thing I'd ever experienced. Vampires are a mythological rendering of narcissistic/psychopathic personality types. They feed on your blood, emotional energy. They can't see their reflection in a mirror, no capacity for self-reflection. They live in darkness/are destroyed by sunlight, only able to function in deceitfulness. Can only be killed by stake through heart. You must kill your emotional connection to them to be released from their power? They create other vampires, pass the trauma/abuse onto their children. They are actually dead and eternally unchanging in appearance, no capacity for emotional connection or growth. You must invite them into your home for them to prey on you. Your lack of boundaries allows them to prey on you. In short, vampires are real, and you probably know at least one. Who needs folklore? Between giant squid, once thought mythical, the duck-billed platypus, also once thought as mythical, and things that we never could have imagined such as the mantis shrimp, can punch holes in metal, briefly heat its claw up the temperature of the sun, and its unique eyes can see at least 16 more colors than humans, colors that we can't even imagine. The world is rich in wonders and terrors. I don't know what it is, but I know there seems to be a globally held myth about creatures/human-like entities that can mimic human sounds, shapeshift, move fast, and harass people who are, generally, alone. Skinwalkers, the Fee, stick Indians/people, the Gongoi. There are even some new variants mentioned in this thread, new to me that is. I'm convinced there is something out there. It's something we don't quite understand, but it certainly has patterns that only seem to shift when you go from region to region. This to me implies that the creature has variances depending on its environment. Southeast Asia seems to have a much more hostile and bolder version that outright gets close to people and calls their name. In California, the stick Indians are said to mimic sounds not normal to hear at night. I'm slowly plucking up the courage to start tracking data points and drawing up a theory. Honestly, Fae folk. When you start reading mythology about Celtic legends, advanced creatures that abhor metal, iron, and have whole worlds hidden from us could be plausible. I mean really, you're talking animal and humanoid species that defy current science and an advanced race developed long before people would be fairly bright to look at us as we advanced and go, you know what? We're going to chill in our realm till these people die off or grow up. 'Cause honestly, if I could skip through to the other side of the veil and avoid humans for a few millennia, I would. Witches weren't magic, but they were wise women with medical training and used magical pageantry to get people to respect their authority. Sea monsters? Of course. Just big sea creatures that have died out from climate change and overfishing. Atlantis, lots of cities came and went in antiquity because rivers were diverted in the desert, but the infrastructure only lasted 50 to 100 years. Also, 10,000 years ago, ice sheets melted, sea levels rose, and landmasses were lost. Plato made Atlantis a moral enemy to ancient Athenians in order to try to convince contemporary Athenians to be less greedy people. He gives not only an incredibly detailed description of the nation but of its size and location, which is a little larger than Alaska, about 300 miles directly west of the Straits of Gibraltar. There would be some evidence of some kind of landmass having existed there for something that size, but there's not. For an idea of what I mean, look up Doggerland, which is the sunken landmass that the UK and Netherlands were the highest mountain peaks of. You can see that on satellite imaging. The same would be true for Atlantis if it had ever existed. Plus, Plato was known for making stuff up like that for dramatic teaching purposes. If you look at most oral-based cultures that we can still draw information from, you will find many of the same mythological features. It is really interesting to see, looking at two cultures such as Celtic and Native American or Celtic and Germanic, relatively close, compared to African or Native American culture. Even Asian oral cultures have remarkably similar mythological features. I believe that it stems from them being polytheists and worshipping a lot of the same things. Granted, some of the name of creatures and gods are different, but they are still comparable in what they represent. Wendigos for sure. I have no idea why I so passionately believe in them. But I think skinwalkers, wendigos, etc. are all kind of tied together in terms of what they are. I've had so many dreams about wendigos, and I don't know why. I didn't even read the short story about them until a couple of years ago, but I've been dreaming about them since I was a child. I'm not big into Bigfoot conspiracies. I think a lot of what people see and attribute to things like Bigfoot / the Jersey Devil / etc. are them catching a glimpse at a wendigo and not processing it correctly. Let's see. There's got to be some bigger sort of deep-sea shark, like the megalodon. The Sasquatch, whether or not it's North American, could be too, considering that they seem to only be talked about in the remote regions. And I like to believe there are giant scorpions that live in the deep parts of the ocean. I mean, we have nautilus, vampire squid, jellyfish that glow like an acid trip, and sharks down there. We've explored less of it than the moon. There's bound to be giant sea scorpions down there. I get embarrassed each time it tells this, but for 30 minutes when I was 18 I legit believed mermaids were real. It was in his when I woke up one Saturday morning and watched Animal Planet. It was a mockumentary about mermaids, but I didn't know it was fake. I legit sat there eating cereal for half the show, mind blown and mouth agape. When my brother woke up I said, "Dude, have you seen this shit?" He went with it for a few minutes before he listed a bunch of reasons why it was fake, number one being that if it were true it wouldn't be aired for the first time on Animal Planet. The loch was carved by glaciers in the last ice age, and up till about 10,000 years ago was filled to the bottom with ice a mile thick. Good luck with anything surviving through that. Even today, there's so little biological productivity in the loch that it could not sustain a breeding population of large creatures. Copa Conan. It is a Faroese myth. I think it would be really cool to go and hide in one of the fjords of Kalsoy, means Man's Island, on the 13th night and watch as the seals get up on the rocks and shed their skin. Transition isn't really clear in that, and turn into beautiful people, and to watch them dance the night away, then go back into the sea after getting back into their skin. It is one of my favorites. The darker part of the myth states that because the seal woman was betrayed by a man who took her skin so she couldn't put it back on and return to the sea, she placed a curse on the men of Kalsoy. This curse says that men will fall off the cliffs of the island until they're able to link their arms and make a ring around the island. And the scary part? Deaths like that are still being reported to this very day. So don't steal the skin of an attractive seal woman dancing in a ford. Skinwalkers. I think they exist, though I have no proof. I do not really believe in the traditional belief that they are crazed killers. Maybe they are afraid of us, or we hear about the Ted Bundy ones and assume they are all like that. Bigfoot or the Yeti or the abominable snowman. There's just so much of our Earth we have yet to explore. Mountains upon mountains of dangerous caves, winding trails, snowfalls and giant ice blocks on Mount Everest where people fall to their death to never have their bodies recovered. Or even Leviathan. A large sea creature from the time of the dinosaurs. I mean, we have sperm whales, and we now know that giant squid exist, so I think it's possible, at least plausible. Plus, there's so much about the ocean we still haven't even explored yet. So many crevices and cracks in places where things could hide for millennia you'd never know. Apparently many hair samples which were claimed to be from things like Bigfoot, Yeti, Sasquatch, etc. were identified and catalogued. Many of these hairs came from things like bears, dogs, sheep, tapirs, and whatever else. But 2 hair samples from Bhutan and India, claimed to be Yeti hair, were almost genetically identical to a polar bear fossil from 40,000 years ago. Now, since bears do live in the Himalayas, and much of it was glaciated during the Ice Age, could there have been some sort of polar bear subspecies which existed in the Himalayas? Perhaps they started to decline in population numbers as the Earth's climate warmed, and the Himalayas became less cold. I have a feeling many humanoid creatures from folklore may have come from encounters with other human species before they died out. Neanderthals have always looked like they could pass for ogres and trolls to me, and it wouldn't surprise me if ancient humans passed down xenophobic stories about them, since that's just what we do with outsiders. There are places where the boundaries between dimensions/universes/Earth and hell or whatever you want to believe really exist, and they account for regions where weird things routinely happen and that carry weird energies. Some examples of places I think are like this would be the Bermuda Triangle, or Appalachia, basically anywhere notorious for weird stuff happening, other than Florida that's just Florida man saving the day. I think dragons were just dinosaur bones some people found and tried to spin their best explanation on what it might have been. So, a story about finding bones of giant lizards turned into finding the bones of dragons, then people made up legends about those dragons, then legends of people slaying dragons, etc. Judging by how horrible the idea of how elephants and rhinos were drawn early on, dragons were anything from crocodiles to iguanas. Think of how people exaggerate the size of the fish they catch. Now imagine some knight coming back from the Holy Land saying he killed a 2-foot lizard. He'd sound like an unsportsmanlike who probably also needs help killing mice. Unless he killed a dragon that was as big as a cow if it was an inch. I'll be honest, I believe in all of them pretty much: Yeti, Bigfoot, Nessie, ghosts, demons. Just because something hasn't been discovered yet doesn't mean it doesn't exist. New species are being discovered every day. Even big ones, they're just elusive. I'm not arrogant enough to think I know conclusively everything that does and doesn't exist. Plus, if a lot of cultures separated by much time and space are all saying the same thing, it's probably got at least an ounce of truth to it. I mean, everyone said Nutella is delicious and anal feels great. And when I tried it for myself I realized that those are popular beliefs for a very solid reason. Dragons, I've seen them in person on 3 separate occasions. They're about 8 feet long and weigh well over 100 pounds. They have leather-like skin and a deadly bite with their serrated teeth and venom. I saw them in captivity, however apparently they are a real menace in other parts of the world where they're called Bwayadarit. They are also called Komodo dragons. Wild stuff. Aluxas from Mayan culture. I swear to God one played a prank on me by hiding the key to my apartment S-gate while I was there. I combed the entire place and emptied my wallet, checking it calmly, both with my eyes and hands for any sign of the key. It was nowhere to be found. That night my flatmate's dog started barking during the night randomly. He never does that. The first thing I did when I woke up was check my wallet, and there was the key. I locked the door of my room so no one could get in during the night. Also, when that happened I was working as a guide in a cave in the peninsula, which also had its own stories. I thoroughly believe in many ancient Hawaiian mythological creatures. For example, the Menehune, which were just basically dwarves that lived in the islands before the first Hawaiians came. They were eventually pushed back and became less common, but the stories of their architectural skills and the fact that a Maui chief listed a few Menehunes in his clan in the 1700s make me curious. Also, the Moo, spiritual guardians of sacred places in Hawaii, definitely exist. There's this one at a fish pond in Oahu, and if you see it is said a disaster will follow. Someone had seen its reported form as a woman in a white dress in the 50s or 60s, and after that a devastating flood hit the North Shore. Thunderbirds. Native American traditions across the Great Plains have stories about thunderbirds, and so do ancient Mesoamerican and ancient South American cultures. Even accounting for the sharing of cultures through trade across the 2 continents, cultures that are vastly different and thousands of miles apart have similar tales of thunderbirds. I think they're extinct now, but I definitely think they were real. Mokolmbembe. It's a myth that there is a pygmy dinosaur that still lives at the rainforest of the Congo. It works on a few levels. Firstly, the fact it is pygmy means that it could remain hidden in the rainforest. Secondly, there have been quite a few new species found in recently, and finally the fact it is pygmy means it could have survived past an extinction event. There were pygmy mammoths that survived much longer than the larger mammoths. Yes, I got this from Tier Zoo. The human mind is particularly good in parsing information and trying to make sense of it based on things that we already know. So if there is some natural phenomena or hell, maybe if there are some creatures that exist in a higher dimension than us, and we occasionally catch a glimpse of them, our brain doesn't know what to do with that information, so we perceive it as some mysterious thing that is influenced by our culture or stories we have heard. That's why people in heavily forested areas where takes of Bigfoot are common. When they see something they don't understand, their mind thinks it is a Bigfoot. This is a cop-out, but I feel a hell of a lot of folklore creatures really did exist, in the sense that people confused real animals for beasts of myth when in fact they're simply weird. A white horse with a single glorious horn, a unicorn, is a functional description of a white rhino, which were accessible to far-traveling merchants or marching armies of the ancient Western world, but unknown to almost any of their other citizens. There is slight difference between a mythical dragon and a Komodo dragon to a guy who was being chased by Komodo dragons. Invincible, unkillable bulls and man-eating lions make nothing but sense to anyone who's seen a bullfight before or seen a lioness stalk prey. How many werewolves were just mangy rabid bears? Colossal squids, aka krakens, are real. Humboldt squids attack people, so it's not unreasonable that so might an enormous one in the rarest of circumstances. A leviathan is just a blue whale, and it might as well be a god if it breaches next your ship. Of course, I love to think some truly mythical stuff is out there, but the real world's kind of cool too if you just overlay the fake thing onto the real. Something that resembles human and feeds on human blood. Almost all cultures from ancient Greece to India and Mexico and Europe as well as Africa have monsters or gods that feed on blood. Maybe some kind of vampires existed. It's very weird and too much of a coincidence to think that so many civilizations away from each other thought, hey, bloodthirsty, sounds amazing. The Albanian Zana. Woodland and mountain women that would test the hearts of any male passerby. If they sensed kindness in their hearts, they would give the man a drop of milk from their breast, which would give him the strength of a whole army. But, if they sensed even a slight hint of evil, they would eat you alive. If they are real, think of how many men have been eaten. Luloyan. A human which appears in a forest in Switzerland. She is wearing a military camel poncho as well as a gas mask. He is quite tall, 190 m, and suddenly appears in the forest on small paths. He doesn't run away, but he will go quietly his way and doesn't let you out of sight. The police actually searched the forest but didn't find him/her. People are telling these monsters or horror stories, but I am going to go with pixies/fairies. I am from an old part of the Black Forest, so we have a ton of stories about people getting lost in the woods for one reason or another, often pixies or fairies. But in addition to that, they are a common theme in European folklore as well, and Japanese folklore also features similar spirits. Being mischievous and playful isn't the most meaningful trait, but these types of spirits do generally feature a theme of getting lost people away from the real world to somewhere else or spiriting away, and can choose who sees them and who doesn't. Some old Celtic legends about witches, ghosts, and such. The worst one is the one a company of people who wander these lands, and if you cross paths with them you die and become one of them. Every summer solstice I may take my clay cauldron out, say the spell and drink the burning, it's in flames, mixed to protect myself from bad witches. If my grandmother's made it over 90, I'm not going to test if it wasn't because of this potion. Several. Unicorns for starters. There are countless four-legged hoofed animals that have horns. There's even a fish with a horn, so why is it so unbelievable that there used to be a horse with a horn? Blows my mind how narrow-minded people are. Also, dragons, yes, real fire-breathing dragons. Again, we have an insect that shoots 2000-degree liquid from its ass when threatened. We have animals that glow, and animals that can almost completely disappear, octopus. So again, why is it so crazy to think there was once a giant reptile that could ignite its body's natural methane somehow? I honest to God think that there is a possibility that banshees exist. In my opinion, it may have started as an ancient tradition of women mourning the loss of their family members, which evolved into something different with time passing. The idea of having someone crying for you in your decisive moments on earth is almost reassuring to some degree. Unless you don't know that you are about to die, in which case, you better run. I'm a firm believer that most folklore creatures that were written about collectively across multiple international borders were and still are legitimate existing creatures. My rationale for this is that I believe that we as human beings evolved past the point where our perception still detects them through any normal means. Eventually our bodies adapted to the point where we didn't perceive them at all. In this way, evolution essentially saved us from having continuous harmful interactions with creatures of these varieties. It also explains why people are much more likely to perceive creatures like this when they are exposed to psychotropic drugs and levels of radiation. Dragons were real. Multiple ancient cultures that had no true forms of communication with each other all produced legends of giant, flying lizards that breathe fire. But where are the fossils? I'll tell you, dummy. On another planet. They all flew into space once they realized that humans were going to fudge up this beautiful planet. Much like how you would just move houses when a termite infestation becomes too much to handle. Duh. Shadow people and domovoi. I hated just typing that alone. I have seen shadow people before, and not while sleepy but during the day. The fact that it seems worldwide is creepy enough. The domovoi is a protective house spirit in Slavic folklore. Supposedly protective of the kids and animals of the house. They can warn people of future events for the family. If the family is unruly behavior-wise, they can become angry and act out and even leave the home. I know of stories matching things similar to that description. People who have spirits protecting them and so on. They aren't all new stories either, some go back. I live in New Orleans. There are all kinds of myths/folklore here. I've just learned to go along with it. Don't pass off the spirits, don't deny the existence of most things because you never know. Weird stuff happens here. I worked for a wedding venue a while back that's an old historic building. It was once someone's house 100+ years ago. The owners told us it was haunted, but the ghosts seemed friendly enough. They would never stay the night there alone though. One of the owners tried and ended up leaving at 3 a.m. Something akin to the Kraken for sure. There's an awful lot of sea out there. Horribly big cephalopods have already been found, so it's not completely outside the realms of possibility that even bigger ones are knocking around down there. I'm not saying they exist, but if I had to bet on one cryptid being real, it'd be an enormous angry squid. Like, sperm whale for a snack-sized squid. It's a big old sea. The Mongolian death worms. It's a large red worm reported by several nomadic tribes in the Mongolian desert. Reports are consistent in detail and no supernatural properties or legends are ascribed to it. It's just a big red worm living in an area we know truly little about. On the other hand, it just might be a snake. Fairies. Nothing. When we were kids, my cousin and I always pretended to catch them. We were jumping on a trampoline and my cousin goes, "Look, a spark fairy." She jumped up to catch it and there was a huge spark in the air. That was like 12 years ago. I recently asked her about it, and she says she still remembers it because we had just been making it up the whole time, and it stunned her. Creatures that dwell in places considered uninhabited by humans, left untouched and undiscovered. Places where humans rarely go. I mean, how could you know what isn't or what is out there if anyone barely ever travels to these places? Though scientifically speaking, it's more probable that creatures of folklore could actually exist in our seas, since 80% of the ocean is still considered unexplored. Also, here's high hopes that Mothman exists, because I want to give that fluffy monster a hug, even if it kills me. Genies or rather, most things that people think of as jinn, fairies, leprechauns, yokai, animal spirits, etc. I think they're all extra-dimensional beings, who look at us like we look at video games or movies or books, but now that we are getting increasingly technological advanced have chosen to avoid us, so we don't accidentally or intentionally entrap them here in the third dimension, like King Solomon supposedly did. I'm convinced the Skinwalker Ranch is real. The first owner lost so much money in cattle living there. Then he sold it out to some research team. And now the government is there. But what makes it all believable is that not once has anyone tried to profit from the property. If anyone tried to get publicity or turn it into a hotspot, then that's one thing, but so far everyone there has told the same stories without gaining anything. And now the government has that place crawling with people. No, something's up there and I don't think even our government knows what it is. I went to school on a reservation in Wyoming for a while. My native friends would tell me not to whistle at night up there because something called a skinwalker would find you and take you out of the game. I'm not one for superstition, but I'm not going to question stories about scary older than America. So, one night I was walking back to my dorm, and for some reason I forgot. It was calm and pleasant, but halfway through fantasy by earth, wind and fire the temperature dropped a noticeable amount. Wind kicked up from 0 to 8.5. You'd think it's just windy in Wyoming, but it was just in the trees. I felt not one gust. When I finally realized I wasn't getting whipped around like I usually do, all 6 feet 160 pounds of me, I remembered what I was told, realized I was done, and took it off. I've never run so fast in my life, and I probably never will again. I tell people I saw stuff moving just on the edge of the path, but that was probably just paranoia. Domovoi. It's a kind of house elf originating from Romanian lore. One night I woke up around 2 a.m. from being asleep on the couch at my parents' house and saw this little fuzzy guy sitting on the mantel. I say, "What's up?" It says it's thirsty. I have an America-sized drink from a fast food place which is over half full still on a TV tray near me and say he can help himself and go back to sleep. The next morning it's empty. Probably all a vivid dream, but I choose to believe that little fuzzy guy drank my drink and hope he's doing alright. Dragons. Dragon-like creatures appear in the folklore and mythology of virtually all cultures around the globe. Simply weird to think that throughout history, people around the globe would all independently make up basically the same non-existent creature. Ancient Chinese, Mesopotamian, Egyptian, Hebrew, Greek, and Norse mythology, just to name a few, all describe some form of dragon. White things. As kids, my friends used to claim to see this white-haired combination of a bear and a wolf with long arms. They said they found mutilated deer, dead dogs, and footprints in a field in the woods by our neighborhood. I always assumed they were being creative because kids do that. But one day I was with my dad and uncle, and they mentioned a white thing in the woods near my neighborhood. They said they loved hunting it at night. The descriptions matched perfectly between my dad and my friends, who had never met. Tall, long arms, shaggy white fur, and a large snarling snout. Kinda like a yeti with the face of a wolf. It's usually a West Virginian thing, but maybe perhaps they've migrated to Ohio? Dragons. Winged serpents can be found in South America and China with largely similar characteristics. There are the feathered ones of South America, the large, scaled beasts of Europe which have long been extinct, and the thin yet powerful Chinese dragons. Wendigos. I think that it's just tribal cannibals. The reports that say they are hideously misshapen could either be a mistake by some lighting, or a human that has either suffered injury or a birth defect, or maybe it was born inbred. I'm fairly sure cannibalism conceives hideous birth defects as well. I think that if I remember, some reports say Wendigos look similar to Yetis. Which is plausible because my theory is that Yetis are just wild animals. It's not insane. My theory is the same for Bigfoot, it's just a bear on its hind legs. I honestly believe mermaids exist, they're just not as pretty as people made them to be in movies and cartoons. I think they're ugly creatures that are shaped like humans on the top and fish on the bottom end. Anyone else agree? Any and all cryptids could be real. There's no proof for or against them, so there is a possibility of them existing. The Earth is rather large, so the possibility of someone who was casually exploring or even trying to get a glimpse of one and actually finding one is slim. They could just be at a different location than the people at any given time. I think the mythical creature that has the highest chance of existing is the Kraken. The ocean is barely explored, and the Kraken is the most feasible sea monster. Most others are kind of unrealistic, like the Leviathan, a sea serpent squid. But I think the Kraken, or a similar giant squid, could be deep down there. Loch Ness Monster. Here's why. Years ago, me and the little lady was out on this boat, you see, all alone at night, when all of a sudden this huge creature, this giant crustacean from the Paleolithic era, comes out of the water. It stood above us looking down with these big red eyes, and I yelled. I said, "What do you want from us, monster?" And the monster bent down and said, I need about $3.50. The Michigan Dogman. I had never even heard of this one until I was hanging out with a friend in a beach town in the northwest part of the Lower Peninsula. We were just screwing around by an old school at around midnight. We hear this loud running and look over to see what looks like a dog, but it is too big to be a normal dog. We quickly decided to run back to his house, and then he asked me if I had ever heard of the Dogman. According to legend, the dogma only comes out every 10 years. The first sighting was a few decades ago during a year that ended in 7. When me and my friend saw him, it was in 2017. Next we decided to look up where he had been spotted, and almost all reports of him were in the northwest part of the Lower Peninsula. There was no real end to the story, nothing really exciting or scary happened, we just saw something that neither of us could explain. Not a popular one, but the Hatman. As a kid and as a teenager, I would have recurring nightmares about it. It would have a black top hat, black suitcase, and would just be wearing an all-black outfit. The nightmares always started the same, where it would just be looking down at the ground. Then so fast, it would tilt its head directly at me. Then it would start walking towards me and would increase in speed. The nightmares always ended the same, except at the end every time, it would get closer and closer to touching me. Unicorns, I believe they exist because I'm obsessed with them. But there are also things and ways that they're mentioned throughout history that support it. They have existed since the classical antiquity era, from the Greco-Roman world, the era of culture between 8th century BC and 6th century AD. They're on ancient seals, tapestries from the Middle Ages, and are mentioned by ancient Greek writers in accounts of natural history. The Bible even talks of a unicorn-like creature. The most realistic reason is the Siberian unicorn, said to have possibly walked among humans, not white beautiful creatures, a giant hairy species of rhino. Aliens. We are one planet in an ever-expanding universe, with billions of galaxies, along with trillions more that haven't been discovered, each holding billions and billions of stars and planets. And you're telling me that we are the only inhabitants of this endless void? Come now. Don't be ridiculous. And don't assume I think this because of conspiracies. Conspiracies are almost always wrong. I just believe simply from percentages and likeliness. This may be too recent to be considered folklore, but the Lovecraft story from beyond has always been something I've latched onto, foolishly, as being real. In the story, Crawford Tillinghast creates an electronic device that emits a resonance wave, which stimulates an affected person's pineal gland, thereby allowing them to perceive planes of existence outside the scope of accepted reality. Of course, the things on that other plane of existence can now see us, and the act of us seeing them causes them to react violently. The device is destroyed before those things can cross over and cause us any harm. I've even used this story as a source of explanation for many other folklore creatures. The environmental conditions are exactly right that we are able to glimpse into their dimension and see them. Of course, the danger is still there if they see you first. Dragons. We call them billionaires and oligarchs, and they are rare and reclusive with vast powers we barely understand. They live on piles of money so huge they could never spend it all, yet they are sensitive to even the tiniest theft. If we treat them very well, with much flattery, they just might let us survive as their minions, but if we anger them, watch out.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.